Houston's Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the Team Associated B6.4 Bag 6, so let's get started. Alright, so we're going to start off with the rear sway bar assembly. So we're going to need the sway bar, the anti-roll bar collar, or anti-roll bar pivots, along with our set screws. We're going to need 3 M3 by 3 millimeter set screws, and we're going to need to make 2 anti-roll bar links. So we're going to need the steering link ball cups times 2 for each side, and an M3 by 10 set screw for each side. The steering link ball cup, part number 91997, is actually going to be in a different bag. I believe it's going to be in bag 9. So here's bag 9. We use these 2 pieces here for the steering links, so we can grab 2 more sets so we can make our anti-roll bar link. So the anti-roll bar link that we're going to make is going to be using the M3 by 10 set screw. There's going to be a 2 millimeter gap in between the ball cups, so we want to make sure that the set screw is only going to be going into each ball cup 4 millimeters. So we're going to go ahead and screw this one in, and then measure to make sure we have 6 millimeters exposed. Close to 6 millimeters. So you can go ahead and put on the other side. There's 2 millimeters. The ball cups aren't going to be lining up. They're going to be off just a little bit. In the manual, there's an image that kind of shows the orientation. It doesn't give you an angle, but I think it's going to be close to 30 degrees or so, 30 to 45 degrees away from the other one. So there's that one. We can go ahead and do the other side. So we can go ahead and put on the anti-roll bar collar. So this is a 1.3 millimeter sway bar. We're going to take the M3 by 3 millimeter set screw, and on this particular screws I like to add a little bit of blue loctite because I don't want these to be backing out. So just a small dab. Then center this up and tighten it down. And you don't want to tighten it down too much because you can end up bending the sway bar. So there we go. Now we can do the anti-roll bar pivots, which are the ends. And before we do that, let's go ahead and install them in our anti-roll bar links. I'm just checking the orientation on which way the roll bar links are going to be oriented. One of them is going to be like the sway bars attached like this, So you want to make sure that the bottom of the pivot lines up with the ball that it's going to install on the control arm. Okay, so same thing on these anti-roll bar pivots. I want to install a little bit of blue Loctite on these set screws, so I don't want these to be backing out. And you want to make sure that the end gap, you want to install it flush with the sway bar. So the sway bar and the anti-roll bar pivot are going to be flush at the ends. All right, the sway bar is ready to install. Now we can focus on the transmission itself. So I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to need our gearbox. Have both of our sides. We're going to need 2 M3/16 button head screws. We're going to need 4 5x10x4 bearings. We're going to need our lay down top shaft, our idler gear shaft, our idler gear. So I want to make sure that the gearbox, there's no sharp edges or anything, and trim if I need to, and it looks like there's some trimming needed. Everything looks good. So now we can go ahead and put this together. So we have the right and left halves of the gearbox. And what we're going to do is we're going to install the bearings into the idler gear, and we want to make sure that the blue seals are visible, just like so. And then we're going to go ahead and install the idler gear shaft, and then this installs in these two holes here and here. So I'm going to go ahead and stick it on one side, just like so. Next, we're going to install the bearings onto the lay down top shaft, and we want the blue seals facing outward as well, just like so. And we're going to install the long piece of the shaft on the right half of the gearbox, just like so. So now when we put it together, just like that, everything moves nice and free, like it should. And we install our 2 M3/16 button head cap screws in these two holes. And there we go. Everything's together. Everything's still moving nice and free. That's exactly what we want. Now we can prepare the ball stud mount for the rear. We're going to need the 2 8mm ball studs for each side, and we're going to need the blue ball stud washers. They're 2mm thick, so we're going to install 2 on each ball stud. And we need to install this using some blue Loctite. Additionally, the ball studs are going to install in the middle holes. So this hole here and this hole here. Everything is snugged up. Now we need our 2.5 by 8 millimeter flathead cap screw. And we're going to install the ball stud mount onto the gearbox. So take note, on the bottom of the ball stud mount, there's a channel that's cut out. That channel is going to sit on this boss that's on the gearbox. So as it sits on there, it'll sit nice and flush with the gearbox, and then we can install the M 2.5 by 8 millimeter flathead cap screw. And you don't want to tighten it too much because you are going plastic, and that hole is being sandwiched with the two halves of the gearbox. So that's the end of bag 6 step 2. We can go ahead and move on to step 3. All right, so for bag 6 step 3, we're going to need our differential that we built in bag 5, along with 2 10 by 15 by 4 bearings. So we're going to go ahead and install the bearings on to the differential, and we want to make sure that the blue seals are facing outward. Next, we're going to need our diff height inserts. The kit setup is +3, so we're going to use these inserts here that have a 0 at the bottom and a 3 at the top, so we can get those off the parts tree. So we can go ahead and install the diff height inserts just like so. And everything moves nice and free. I don't see anything rubbing, so that's great. I want to make sure that the 3 is going to be facing the top, like so. The 3's right here, the 0's at the bottom. And you want to go ahead and install into the gearbox. And you want to make sure that the screw heads on the differential are on the same side as this shaft, or on the right side of the car. So everything fits in there like it should. Everything moves nice and smooth like it should. All right, so with the diff installed, we can go ahead and put some diff lube on the gears. So diff lube isn't included. I have this stuff that I've been using. It's some Teflon grease from Ultimate Racing. Another one I'd recommend is the Protect grease. That's white, comes like in a little syringe. I'll see if I can link that in the description below in case y'all don't have any. So all I'm going to do is add a little bit on some of these teeth, and then just rotate the gearbox, and this grease will help lubricate everything and kind of keep everything quiet as well. So don't want to put too much because it's just going to fling everywhere, but that should be just enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and rotate, let it kind of work itself where it needs to be. As you can see, it's getting some pretty good coverage. That's exactly what we want. I'm going to go ahead and take the diff out, and then I'm just going to wipe the excess that is down here. There we go. Perfect. nice and smooth. Okay. So now we can install the gearbox top along with our sway bar. So we can go ahead and place our sway bar into place in the back of the gearbox right here. And then we're going to take the gearbox cover, make sure it doesn't need to be trimmed, and it looks like mine does. So go ahead and trim if necessary. So now we can go ahead and install the gearbox top, just like so. And we're going to need 2 M3x12 button head cap screws and 2 M3x16 button head cap screws. So the M3x12 button head cap screws are going to install in these 2 holes here and here, and the M3x16 button head cap screws are going to install here and here. And you want to install these in a crisscross pattern and tighten them down in a crisscross pattern, so that way you don't cause any binding in the transmission itself. Everything is still moving nice and free. Okay. Everything still moves nice and free. I don't feel any binding or anything like that. There's kind of a tight spot here, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to back off just a little bit on each of these screws, and hopefully that's going to loosen it up a little bit. Okay. Next, we're going to need 2 M3x3 set screws, and we're going to install them in these 2 holes here and here. These are just there to help keep the sway bar from moving up and down too much. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install these, touch the sway bar, and then back off to make sure the sway bar can move freely under its own weight. So you see there, the sway bar is stuck, won't move. So we're gonna back off just a little bit so it can move on its own, just like so. There we go. So now we need our lay down chassis brace, a shock pivot ball, an M3x16 button head cap screw, and an M3x20 button head cap screw. So first things first, this is going to be your lay down chassis brace. It's the longer one. The shorter one, if you install it, you cannot install your motor. So for the lay down transmission, you don't need this one, you only need this one. Go ahead and use your shock pliers to install the shock pivot ball. So we're going to go ahead and install this like so, and then install using an M3x16 button head cap screw. And then the M3x20 button head cap screw is going to install in this hole. And after installing that screw, I want to make sure that everything is still moving nice and free, since you installed another screw into the gearbox. And it looks like everything's moving nice and free, like it should. So you can go ahead and move on. So now we are going to need our motor plate, 3 M3x10 flathead screws, along with the gear guard. If you do not install the gear guard, the plate is actually going to be installed at an angle, and the gear mesh between your spur gear and your pinion isn't going to be correct and can cause accelerated wear. So here's the gearbox. The M3x10 flathead screws are going to install in these holes here. And they're going to go through these 3 holes. And the gear guard is going to go on the back side, just like so. And the screws are going to go through the mounting points there. So you can see the back of the motor plate. We've got the screws coming in through the gear guard. So you can go ahead and install. All right, everything still moves nice and free. Now we can get our slipper clutch assembly ready. So we're going to need our slipper pads, the slipper hub inner piece and outer piece, along with our spur gear. So there's 2 spur gears that come with the kit, a 78 and a 72. And there's the 72 spur gear is used for stock motor use. So I'm running in a stock class. I'm going to be running this in our 21.5 class, probably for the first race, finish up our series that we have going on, and then I'll move up to 17.5. So take note of the walls on the spur gear. So as you can see on this side, the walls are taller. You want this to be facing away from the motor mount, away from the gearbox. So we can go ahead and assemble this together. So what you want to do is install the slipper pad using the notches, just like so. We have our outer piece, we have our slipper on the other side with our inner piece, just like so. And then we have our top shaft, and we need to install the top shaft pin. So it's a roll pin, and it installs in a hole right here. It can be kind of a pain to install, but what I found works is just using some pliers and pushing it in. All right, so I got the pin installed as even as I could. So what we want to do is go ahead and insert that pin, make sure it sits in the notch, and then we can install this through the slipper pad, the spur gear, the other slipper pad and the inner piece of the slipper assembly. So next what we can do is install it onto the shaft. And take note, the shaft is not completely round, it's got two flats. So when you install it, you might have to rotate it around. And you want to try to keep as much tension as possible. There you go. So all I did was I held the out drives and rotated until I got it into place. And double check to make sure that your inner slipper pad is sitting flush or properly like it should. This is a part where I see a lot of people making mistakes because they don't double check and that slipper isn't sitting properly. So mine wasn't sitting properly, so I just took it apart and I'm going to reinstall it. So again, you can see the slipper pad is not sitting properly. So it might take a few times to get this right. There we go. So the slipper pad is sitting properly on both sides. That's exactly what we want. So make sure you keep your finger pressed and compressing this whole assembly. So next what we're going to need is the inner slipper spring adapter, which is going to be this piece here. It's got a boss on both ends. You want to put the boss that has a smaller diameter towards the gearbox, like so. Then you want to install the slipper spring. Then we can install the outer slipper spring adapter along with the M3 lock nut that's flanged. And you want to tighten it down so that the nut is flush with the top shaft screw. That's the initial setting. There we go. And everything moves nice and free. There's no binding. So let's go ahead and get our shock tower prepared. We're going to need our rear shock tower along with these two pieces here, which are the shock guards. So I'm going to face the number backwards because I actually don't want it to be seen, since this is going to install from the front side. When this is installed, if this is facing backwards, then it won't be visible. I think it'll look tacky. So that being said, the shock tower guards need to install from the rear. So it's going to install like this. So they're going to install on the same side as the lettering or the numbering. Okay. So we're going to need our shock bushings along with the two M3x22 low profile socket head cap screws. So these are the low profile screws. And the kit setup is in the second innermost hole. So take note of that. And I like to add a little bit of blue loctite on here, so that way these shock bushings don't come loose. You don't want to tighten it down too much because it'll deform the shock tower guard, so just be wary of that. So there we go. So now we can install the rear wing mount to the shock tower. So we're going to need the wing mount itself and the wing mount spacers. So we can go ahead and get those off the parts tree. So we're going to install the spacers first, and then we're going to install the wing mounts just like so. And then we're going to need 4 M3 by 20 button head cap screws that we're going to install from the front of the shock tower. So the wing mounts are now installed. Now we can go ahead and install the shock tower wing mount assembly onto the gearbox. So it's going to install from the front of the gearbox like so, and we're going to need to install it using 4 M3 by 12 button head cap screws. They're going to install in these 4 holes. So that's now installed. Now we can grab our chassis and install the gearbox assembly onto the chassis. So to install the gearbox onto the chassis, we're going to need 2 M3 by 16 flathead screws and 6 M3 by 10 flathead screws. So the 2 M3 by 12 flathead screws are going to install through the rear bumper and D-block and install in these 2 holes here. The 6 M3 by 10 flathead screws are going to go through the chassis and install in these 6 holes. So I just got those started. The other 6 screws that we need to install are going to install in these holes. I'll make sure I can get the screws installed before tightening everything down. The suspension arms move nice and free like they should. So now we can install the sway bar onto the balls on the control arm. So I like to use a little bit of leverage and pop right in. And there we go. Alright, so sway bar's on, everything moves nice and free, there's no binding. Transmission, since we installed the transmission onto the chassis, we want to make sure that everything moves nice and free, and it does. So look how smooth that is. beautiful. So that concludes bag 6. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Let me know down in the comments below if you had any issues. I'll do my best to help you out if I can. Stay tuned for the next video, which is going to be bag 7. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.